The auction house on Kepler Station reeked of desperation and greed. Beneath the polished chrome surfaces and holographic displays, the stench of fear lingered like a disease that no air recycler could cleanse. Captain Marcus Chun stood at the back of the crowd, his weathered hands clenched into fists as he watched the proceedings with barely contained disgust. The auctioneer, a Vorthek with scales that gleamed like oil in the artificial light, gestured toward the platform where the next lot waited. "Specimen 77 Alpha," he announced in Galactic Standard, his voice carrying that particular smugness that came with selling sentient beings. "Rare ethereal female, perfect condition, fully trained in domestic and entertainment protocols." Marcus felt his stomach turn. The creature on the platform was unlike anything he had seen in his 20 years of deep space trading. She stood roughly human height, but her form seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight. Her skin held an opalescent quality that changed from pale blue to silver as the lights moved across her. Most striking were her eyes, large, luminous orbs that held an intelligence so profound it made the auction house's casual brutality even more obscene. Heavy neural dampening chains bound her wrists and ankles, the metal designed specifically to suppress her people's natural abilities. Marcus had read about ethereals in restricted xenobiology texts. They were energy manipulators, capable of feats that bordered on miraculous. The chains didn't just bind her physically, they cut her off from the very essence of what made her who she was. "Bidding starts at 50,000 credits, the auctioneer continued. "This specimen has been fully processed through the hegemony's conditioning programs. Complete obedience guaranteed with full neural compliance packages installed." Marcus watched as wealthy alien merchants and collectors raised their bidding paddles. A Korthian crime lord with cybernetic implants covering half his face seemed particularly interested, his mechanical eye whirring as it focused on the ethereal. Beside him, a consortium of draconian nobles whispered among themselves, their scaled faces twisted into expressions of anticipation. The bidding climbed quickly. 60,000, 75, 100,000 credits more than most people saw in a lifetime. Spent casually on owning another sentient being, Marcus had come to Kepler Station following rumors of rare archaeological artifacts being sold in the black markets. His ship, the Wanderer's Dream, needed expensive repairs after their last run, and he hoped to find something valuable enough to cover the costs. He hadn't expected to stumble into something that would haunt his conscience for the rest of his life. The ethereal's eyes swept across the crowd, not with hope that had likely been beaten out of her long ago, but with a sort of resigned dignity that broke something inside Marcus's chest. When her gaze briefly met his, he saw recognition there. Not of him personally, but of something different. Perhaps it was the way he wasn't leering at her like the others. Or maybe her people possessed some ability to sense character even through the neural dampeners. 120,000, called out the Korthian crime lord. His translator rendered his native tongue into cold, mechanical words. "I have specific uses for this one." The way he said it made Marcus's skin crawl. He had heard stories about what happened to sentients who disappeared into the Korthians' private collections. The lucky ones died quickly. 150,000 from the Draconian Consortium, the auctioneer acknowledged. "Do I hear 200,000 credits?" The words left Marcus's mouth before his rational mind could stop them. Every head in the auction house turned toward him, and he felt the weight of dozens of alien gazes. His bank account held exactly 215,000 credits, his entire life savings, plus the emergency fund he kept for ship repairs. The Korthian's mechanical eye fixed on him with a grinding sound. 210,000, he countered, his voice carrying the promise of violence. Marcus stepped forward, feeling sweat bead on his forehead despite the station's climate control. 215,000 credits. Final bid. Silence stretched through the auction house like a held breath. Marcus could hear his heart hammering against his ribs. He was one human surrounded by some of the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy. Having just spent everything he owned on a gesture, he couldn't fully explain to himself. The auctioneer's serpentine tongue flicked out, tasting the tension in the air. "Going once, going twice, ... He paused, clearly hoping for another bid. When none came, he brought down his gavel with obvious disappointment. Sold to the human for 215,000 credits. The Corthian rose from his seat, towering over the crowd. His cybernetic implants cast red light across his scarred features as he fixed Marcus with a stare that promised future retribution. But Marcus held his ground, even as his hands trembled slightly at his sides. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood in the station's transfer bay, signing forms and transferring credits while trying not to think about how he was going to explain this to his crew. The ethereal stood beside him, still chained, still silent. The auction house's security chief, a massive Brutarian with arms like tree trunks, handed over the control device for her neural dampeners. Remote override, he explained in broken galactic standard. She caused trouble, you press red button, full neural shutdown. Marcus took the device and immediately felt sick holding it. He looked at the ethereal, noting how she flinched slightly when the Brutarian mentioned the shutdown function. Even with her abilities suppressed, she understood what they were discussing. What's her name? Marcus asked. The Brutarian looked confused. Name? She is property. You give name if you want. After the paperwork was complete and credits transferred, Marcus found himself walking through the station's corridors with his inadvertent purchase. The ethereal moved silently beside him, her chains making soft clinking sounds with each step. Other beings they passed, merchants, travelers, station personnel, gave them a wide berth. Some stared with obvious curiosity at the human who had just bought himself an ethereal slave. They reached the docking bay where the Wanderer's Dream waited. Marcus's ship wasn't much to look at, a modified cargo hauler with too many repair patches and not enough maintenance, but she was his home. And she had carried him through more adventures than he could count. His crew was waiting at the airlock. First Officer Sarah Kim, a tough-as-nails ex-military type who had served with Marcus in the Colonial Defense Force. Chief Engineer Rodriguez, whose hands were permanently stained with engine oil and whose knowledge of faster-than-light drives bordered on the supernatural. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, their medic and xenobiologist, whose gentle demeanor hid a core of titanium steel. All three stared in shock as Marcus approached with the chained ethereal. Captain, Sarah said slowly, please tell me you didn't just spend our repair money on ... She gestured helplessly at the ethereal. I can explain, Marcus began, then stopped. Could he? How did someone explain that they had just bankrupted themselves because they couldn't stomach watching a sentient being sold like livestock? Rodriguez stepped forward, his weathered face grim. Marcus, you know I respect you, but what the hell were you thinking? We're barely holding together as it is. The hyperdrive is making sounds that would make grown engineers weep. The life support is held together with prayer and spare parts. And now, I know, Marcus cut him off. I know exactly how this looks. But I couldn't. He glanced at the ethereal, who was watching their exchange with those luminous eyes. I couldn't just walk away. Dr. Hayes approached slowly, her medical instincts overriding her shock. She's malnourished, she observed quietly. And those chains are causing neural pathway disruption. If they stay on much longer, the damage could be permanent. Then we remove them, Marcus said immediately. Captain, Sarah's voice held a warning tone. Those are hegemony control devices. Removing them without proper authorization is a Class A felony. They execute people for less. Marcus looked at the ethereal again, noting the way she held herself with dignity despite her circumstances. She was someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister. She had hopes and dreams and fears just like any other person, and she was being treated like an object. Load her onto the ship, he said finally. We'll figure out the rest once we're away from the station. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then saw the expression on Marcus's face. She had served with him long enough to recognize when his mind was made up. You're going to get us all killed, she muttered. But she stepped aside as they boarded the Wanderer's Dream. Marcus noticed how the ethereal moved with fluid grace despite her chains. She paused at the threshold, looking back at the docking bay as if memorizing it. Marcus wondered how long it had been since she had stepped foot on a ship that wasn't carrying her toward another sail. The ship's corridors were narrow and functional. designed for efficiency rather than comfort. The ethereal's opalescent skin seemed to glow more brightly in the dimmer lighting, and Marcus caught Rodriguez staring in fascination. Where should she ... Sarah began, then stopped. They had 4 crew quarters, a small medical bay, cargo holds, and common areas. None of them were designed for prisoners. The spare quarters, Marcus decided, next to mine. They reached the small cabin that had been used for storage. Dr. Hayes quickly cleared out The medical bay of the Wanderer's Dream had never seen anything like this. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes worked with practiced precision, her scanner revealing the intricate neural pathways that connected the hegemony chains to Lyrian's nervous system. The ethereal lay still on the examination table, her opalescent skin shifting between silver and pale blue as the scanner's beams passed over her. This is incredibly sophisticated, Dr. Hayes murmured, studying the readouts. The chains aren't just physical restraints, they're integrated into her neural network. Removing them incorrectly could cause permanent brain damage or death. Marcus stood beside the table, watching Lyrian's face. She had been silent since they entered the medical bay, but he could see tension in the way she held herself. How long will it take? He asked. Hours, Dr. Hayes replied. Maybe longer. I need to map every connection point and figure out how to safely disconnect them without causing neural feedback. Captain Rodriguez poked his head through the medical bay door. Marcus, we've got a problem. Station security is asking questions about the human who bought an ethereal at auction. They want to verify our cargo manifest before we leave. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. How long do we have? Maybe an hour before they start getting suspicious, Rodriguez answered. And there's something else. That Corthian from the auction? He's been asking around about you? Word is he's not happy about losing his prize. The sound that came from Lyrian was barely audible, a soft intake of breath that might have been fear. Marcus looked down at her and saw that her luminous eyes were wide with something approaching panic. The Corthian Syndicate doesn't forget, she whispered. They will hunt you across the galaxy for what you've done. Let them, Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. Dr. Hayes, is there any way to speed this up? The doctor shook her head. Not without risking her life. These chains are designed to kill the wearer if removed improperly. It's a failsafe to prevent exactly what we're trying to do. Sarah Kim's voice crackled over the comm system. Captain, you need to see this. We're getting encrypted communications. Traffic between the Corthian ship and someone calling themselves the Collector. They're offering a bounty for the return of 77 Alpha in undamaged condition. Marcus closed his eyes. Of course there would be complications. There were always complications when you tried to do the right thing in a galaxy that rewarded cruelty. How much? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. 500,000 credits, Sarah's voice was grim. Dead or alive, but they prefer alive. Lyrian made that soft sound again, and this time Marcus realized it wasn't fear, it was bitter laughter. You paid 215,000 credits for me, she said quietly. Now they're offering more than twice that for my return. You could make a considerable profit. The suggestion hung in the air like poison. Marcus looked at her, noting the way she was studying his face, searching for any sign that he might be tempted by the offer. He realized that this was a test she had probably given to dozens of previous owners, and that most had failed it. The only place you're going, Marcus said firmly, is wherever you want to go once these chains are off. Something shifted in Lyrian's expression, a crack in the careful emotional armor she had built around herself. For just a moment, Marcus saw through to the person underneath. The one who had been systematically broken and rebuilt to serve others' desires. Dr. Hayes looked up from her scanner. I think I can do this, but I need help. The neural pathways are too complex for one person to monitor safely. I need someone to watch the secondary feedback loops while I work on the primary connections. I'll do it, Marcus said immediately. Marcus, you're not a doctor, but I am, Lyrian interrupted softly. Both humans turned to stare at her. Before the hegemony destroyed my world, I was a healer among my people. I understand ethereal neural physiology better than any scanner. Dr. Hayes blinked in surprise. You're a doctor? Was, Lyrian corrected. The conditioning programs were designed to suppress that knowledge, but removing the chains will restore access to my memories. If you're willing to trust me, I can guide you through the process. Marcus didn't hesitate. Do it. The next 40 minutes were the longest of Marcus's life. Working together, Dr. Hayes and Lyrian carefully mapped every connection point where the chains interfaced with the ethereal's nervous system. Marcus monitored their progress while Rodriguez kept watch for station security, and Sarah prepared the ship for immediate departure. As Dr. Hayes worked, Lyrian began to change. The process of accessing her suppressed memories seemed to awaken something that had been sleeping. Her skin grew brighter, and Marcus could swear he felt electricity in the air around her. The primary neural interface is disengaged, Dr. Hayes announced. Lyrian, how do you feel? Like I'm remembering how to breathe, the ethereal whispered. Her voice was stronger now, more resonant. The secondary inhibitors are integrated into the ankle restraints. Be careful, they're designed to overload if tampered with. Working with increasing confidence, Dr. Hayes continued the delicate process. Each chain that came free seemed to return another piece of Lyrian's identity to her. Marcus watched in fascination as her movements became more fluid, more graceful. The careful, beaten-down posture of a slave gradually gave way to something that spoke of strength and dignity. Captain, Rodriguez's voice over the com carried urgency. Station security just launched a patrol ship. They're doing random inspections of departing vessels. We need to go, now. Almost finished, Dr. Hayes called back. Just the wrist restraints left. As the final chain fell away, the change in Lyrian was dramatic. Her skin blazed with inner light, and the air around her seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. She sat up slowly, flexing her fingers as if seeing them for the first time in years. My abilities, she breathed. They're returning. She looked at Marcus, and for the first time, he saw her without the weight of slavery crushing her spirit. She was magnificent not just physically, but in the way she carried herself, the intelligence that burned in her eyes, the sense of power that radiated from her like heat from a star. Why? She asked simply. Why did you risk everything for someone you don't even know? Marcus thought about it. He could give her a dozen rational explanations, talk about moral principles or basic decency, but the truth was simpler and more complex than that. Because it was the right thing to do, he said finally. And because nobody deserves to live in chains. The ship's alarm klaxon suddenly blared throughout the medical bay. Sarah's voice crackled over the com with barely controlled panic. Captain, we've got big problems. The Corthian ship just launched, and they're broadcasting our position to every bounty hunter in the sector. Also, station security is demanding immediate boarding access. Marcus helped Lyrian to her feet, noting how she moved now with liquid grace. Can you walk? I can do more than walk, she said, and there was something in her voice that made Marcus's spine tingle. With your permission, Captain, I'd like to help get us out of this situation. They rushed to the bridge, where Sarah was frantically working the communications console while Rodriguez pushed the engines to their limits. Through the view screen, Marcus could see Kepler Station's security ships moving to intercept them, while the Corthian vessel a sleek, predatory thing bristling with weapons closed from another angle. Options? Marcus asked tersely. Not many, Sarah replied. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and about to be trapped between station security and a crime syndicate. The hyperdrive is still charging. We need another 3 minutes before we can jump. We don't have 3 minutes, Rodriguez called from the station. The Corthian ship will be in firing range in 90 seconds. Lyrian stepped onto the bridge, and Marcus heard his crew gasp. In the soft lighting of the command center, her inner radiance was even more pronounced. She looked like a being made of starlight and dreams. Captain, she said formally, request permission to take defensive action. Marcus looked at her, then at the rapidly approaching ships on the view screen. What exactly are you proposing? Something the hegemony spent considerable effort to prevent, Lyrian replied. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. The first time Marcus had seen her display any emotion other than fear or resignation, she moved to the center of the bridge and closed her eyes. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and Marcus could feel the hair on his arms standing up. Energy crackled around Lyrian's form, building in intensity until the air itself seemed to sing. "Ethereals don't just manipulate energy," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Marcus's bones. "We are energy in a very real sense. And right now, I'm about to remind this sector why my people were considered so dangerous that an entire galactic coalition was formed to hunt us down." She raised her hands, and the lights on the bridge dimmed as every spare amp of power in the ship was drawn toward her. Through the view screen, Marcus could see the first security ship approaching, its weapons powered and ready to fire. Warning shots across their bow. The security ship's commander broadcast over open channels. "Prepare to be boarded for inspection." Lyrian opened her eyes, and they blazed like miniature suns. "No," she said simply. What happened next defied every law of physics Marcus thought he understood. A pulse. The refugee camp on Nesha 7 was not marked on any official star charts. Hidden in the asteroid field beyond the system's fourth planet, it existed in the spaces between civilizations, sheltering those who had nowhere else to go. Marcus had learned about it from a contact in the Outer Rim. Territories, one of the few places in the galaxy where people asked fewer questions about your past. 3 weeks had passed since their escape from Kepler Station. 3 weeks of running, hiding, and constantly looking over their shoulders. The bounty on Lyrian had grown to nearly 1,000,000 credits, and Marcus's crew had found their faces posted on wanted bulletins across 6 sectors. "There," Lyrian said softly, pointing through the view screen at a collection of patched-together structures built into the largest asteroid. "Other survivors. I can sense them." Dr. Hayes looked up from her scanner readings. "I'm detecting approximately 200 life signs. Multiple species, but the readings are ... unusual." "Ethereals," Lyrian confirmed. "My people have learned to mask their energy signatures to avoid detection, but I can still feel them." As they approached the docking bay, Marcus reflected on how much had changed during their flight from bounty hunters and crime syndicates. Lyrian had gradually opened up about her past, sharing fragments of memory about her homeworld and the systematic genocide that had nearly wiped out the Ethereals. The hegemony's propaganda had painted them as dangerous energy beings who threatened galactic stability. The reality was far more complex and infinitely sadder. The Ethereals had been healers, artists, and philosophers, a peaceful species, whose only crime had been possessing abilities that others feared or coveted. The docking bay was crude but functional, carved directly into the asteroid's rock face and sealed with energy barriers. As the Wanderer's dream settled onto the landing platform, Marcus could see figures watching from the shadows, beings who had learned to be cautious around strangers. "Captain," Sarah's voice held a note of concern, "my sensors are detecting significant energy buildups throughout the facility. Whatever's in there, it's more heavily defended than it appears." "Good," Marcus replied. "That means they've survived this long by being smart." A delegation approached their ship as the crew prepared to disembark. Marcus recognized the leader immediately, another ethereal, older than Lyrian, her opalescent skin bearing the scars of old injuries. Beside her walked a human woman whose clothing marked her as former colonial defense force, and a tall, insectoid being whose species Marcus didn't recognize. "I am Healer Vayana," the ethereal woman said as they met at the airlock. Her eyes, similar to Lyrian's but dimmed with age and sorrow, studied Marcus carefully. "We felt the energy pulse that brought you here. You travel with one of our kind." "Her name is Lyrian," Marcus replied. "She was enslaved by the hegemony conditioning programs. We freed her from an auction on Kepler Station." Vayana's expression shifted, hope and disbelief warring across her features. "Lyrian? Lyrian of the Silver Current?" She looked past Marcus to where Lyrian stood behind him. "Child, I thought you died when Ethereals fell." The reunion that followed broke something loose in Marcus's chest that he hadn't known was there. watching Lyrian embrace another of her people, seeing the careful, emotional armor she had worn for so long finally crumble away completely, Marcus understood for the first time the true scope of what they had accomplished. The human woman introduced herself as Commander Janet Torres, former Colonial Defense Force. "I've been helping coordinate security for the camp," she explained. "When we detected your approach, I had to see who else was crazy enough to help ethereals in this political climate." "You're human," Marcus observed. "How did you end up here?" Torres's expression hardened. "I was ordered to participate in a pacification action against an ethereal settlement that was supposedly harboring terrorists. When we arrived, we found families, children, healers trying to tend to the sick and wounded." She paused, looking at her hands. "I refused the order to fire on civilians. My commanding officer relieved me of duty and marked me as a deserter." Marcus nodded slowly. It seemed that humans weren't the only ones struggling with the moral implications of the hegemony's policies. Over the following days, Marcus and his crew learned more about the hidden network of refugee camps scattered throughout the galaxy's forgotten corners. The survivors had built something remarkable, a community that transcended species barriers, where former soldiers, displaced civilians, and escaped slaves worked together to stay alive and free. Lyrian flourished in ways that amazed Marcus. With access to her people's knowledge and the support of other survivors, her healing abilities returned in full. She spent her days working in the camp's medical facilities, using her energy manipulation to heal injuries that conventional medicine couldn't touch, but their peaceful respite couldn't last forever. "We've got problems," Commander Torres announced during a camp leadership meeting. "My contacts in the Colonial Defense Force are reporting massive hegemony fleet movements. They're conducting systematic sweeps of the Outer Rim territories." The camp's senior council representatives from a dozen species, united only by their refugee status, gathered around a holographic star chart. Red markers indicated confirmed hegemony positions, and the pattern was unmistakable. "They were closing in. How long?" asked Dr. Hayes, who had been helping establish medical protocols for the camp. "Days, maybe hours," Torres replied grimly. "This location has been compromised. We need to evacuate immediately." Marcus studied the star chart, noting the positioning of hegemony forces. "They're not just looking for this camp," he realized. "This is a coordinated operation across multiple sectors. They're trying to clean out all the refugee settlements at once." Viana's aged features were drawn with worry. "Our ships can carry perhaps half the camp's population. The rest—" She didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what happened to refugees caught in hegemony sweeps. "The Wanderer's dream can take maybe 40 people," Marcus said, already running calculations in his head. "But that still leaves more than 150 behind." Lyrian, who had been silent during most of the discussion, finally spoke. "What if we didn't run?" Every head in the room turned toward her. Commander Torres raised an eyebrow. "Come again?" "The hegemony has spent decades teaching the galaxy to fear ethereal abilities," Lyrian said, her voice gaining strength. "They've painted us as dangerous energy beings who threaten galactic stability. What if, for once, we actually lived up to that reputation?" Marcus felt a chill of understanding. "You're talking about fighting back." "I'm talking about making a statement," Lyrian corrected. "For too long, my people have run and hidden. We've allowed ourselves to be hunted to near extinction because we believe that violence would only prove our enemies right. But perhaps it's time to show the galaxy what we're really capable of when we stop holding back." The debate that followed was intense. Some argued for evacuation, others for surrender, and a few supported Lyrian's proposal for armed resistance. In the end, it came down to a simple vote. The camp chose to fight. The hegemony fleet arrived 6 hours later, 12 heavy cruisers and a command dreadnought, more than enough firepower to reduce the asteroid to cosmic dust. Admiral Corvin, the hegemony's leading expert on ethereal suppression, commanded the fleet personally from the bridge of his flagship. His opening transmission was brief and to the point. "Refugee camp designation 777. This is Admiral Corvin of the hegemony fleet. You are harboring known terrorists and escaped property. Surrender immediately or face annihilation? The response that came back surprised him. Instead of the usual pleading or desperate attempts at negotiation, a calm human voice answered, "Admiral, this is Captain Marcus Chun of the civilian vessel Wanderer's Dream. We're not harboring terrorists. We're protecting people, and we're not surrendering." "Captain Chun," Admiral Corvin's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "You are harboring escaped ethereal slaves and other criminal elements. Stand down immediately, or I will classify your ship as a hostile vessel." Marcus looked around the makeshift command center they had established in the asteroid's core. Lyrian stood beside him, her skin glowing with barely contained energy. Commander Torres coordinated the camp's defenses with military precision. Dr. Hayes worked frantically to ensure the medical facilities could handle casualties. His own crew had volunteered to stay and fight, even knowing the odds. "Admiral," Marcus replied, "these aren't slaves or property. They're people, and we're going to protect them." The first salvo from the hegemony fleet lit up space around the asteroid like an artificial sun. Energy shields, jury-rigged from salvaged ship components and reinforced by ethereal power manipulation, held against the initial barrage but wouldn't last long. "Now, Lyrian," Marcus said quietly, "what followed had never been attempted before in recorded galactic history. 23 ethereal survivors, working in perfect harmony, reached out with their combined abilities and touched every ship in the attacking fleet simultaneously, but instead of shutting down their power systems as Lyrian had done at Kepler Station, they did something far more subtle and infinitely more powerful. They accessed the communication networks. Every screen, every holographic display, every communication device in the hegemony fleet SU